When I'm old and grey and dying, will I regret the things I was too scared of trying? I swear my soul has holes inside from times I cheated, stole and lied. What will I do while I have time? How can I live, not just survive? I've been asleep, wasting my time, waiting for moments to arrive. What shall I do? She told me I should leave this place, but I've grown content with its familiar embrace. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to take a risk and step outside. Where can I go that I've never been? I'm jumping in now, but then if I leave my home, will I be free? Or will something else be waiting to trap me? I don't know what to do. We all are waiting to be confident, waiting to be sure. Why are we so scared of always wanting more? We always listen to our shadows when they tell us not to go. Well, maybe I won't listen and I'll travel down that road I've never been. I kept my blinds all closed quite tightly, for I thought that if they were open even slightly, I would do something I would regret. Well, maybe it's time to let in the light. We all are scared of what we don't know. Well, I think it's time we let our fears go. I promise you we will be alright. Just take my hand and jump into the night. Now I'm old and grey and dying, and I don't regret a thing. Ooh.
Last summer, Tess and I were approached with the opportunity to attend the Midwest Leadership School in Beloit. It's a week-long camp where UU youth from all across the Midwest come together and learn about leadership and our faith. People had told us that YMSL would be an amazing opportunity, but we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. Leadership school is indescribable. We made friends that will last a lifetime and took countless risks. We both pushed ourselves to grow in every way possible. This quote really resonated with us and with our Midwest Leadership School experience. When we were children, we used to think that when we were grown up, we would no longer be vulnerable. But to grow up is to accept vulnerability. To be alive is to be vulnerable.
So a couple weeks before the camp, we all of us took an online Myers-Briggs test, and we were told that these results were going to play a part in our lessons for the week. The day finally came to get our test results back. All 33 of us from leadership school were sitting in a circle, and the dean of the school came around and gave us our reports. We all opened them immediately. I looked down and I was shocked. I was ISFP, introvert, sensing, feeling, and perceiving. I was sitting next to Audrey and Lizzie, two people I've known my entire childhood, and we all had the exact same reaction. Since when is Tess an introvert? I read the report inside and out, and it genuinely felt like it was being written specifically for me. I couldn't understand how this test knew me better than I did. Dean Malache told us that if we had any questions about our results, we should come to him with questions. I had more questions than I could count, so I took a risk and asked him about it after our final meeting of the day. I told him that I never really stop talking when I'm in class, and how public speaking doesn't bother me, and how I've always been pretty outgoing and extremely talkative. So people always assumed I was an extrovert, and I believed them. So how could I possibly be an introvert? He answered my questions in an extremely you manner, with more questions. Do you like being the center of attention all the time? God, no, that makes me so anxious. Do you prefer to work in small groups or large groups? Definitely small groups. When you need to recharge, do you do it with others or by yourself? By myself. Do you like meeting new people? Not really. It makes me nervous, but I like the people I already know. Then he explained to me that my dominant trait was the feeling trait. This means that I care deeply about people and thrive off of making connections. So many people, including myself, may have misinterpreted my talkative nature as an extroverted quality, while in reality, it's my feeling trait trying to make connections with others. He told me that all of my answers to the questions he posed were textbook feeling introvert. Then he told me something that stuck with me to this day. He told me that he had been watching the way I interact with the students, and he noticed something. He told me that he thought I always put others before myself, and my introverted nature kept me from speaking out and asking for help when I needed it. He challenged me to start putting myself first and to learn more about myself. For the rest of the week, I kept his words in mind. I started putting myself before others sometimes, and I risked rejection and asked for help when I needed it. I risked taking time to learn who I really was and what made me happiest. It was one of the most emotionally challenging weeks of my life, but ultimately the most fulfilling. I will always be grateful for the risks that I took to better understand myself.
So this is about a risk that I took stepping outside of my comfort zone that I kind of wish I'd taken sooner. As someone with social anxiety who has always known I'm an introvert, unlike Tess, reaching out to new people is something I've always really struggled with. I'm fine if someone else reaches out and makes an effort to get to know me, but reaching out myself is something I've never felt comfortable doing. So when I ended up with a roommate, Gigi, who was just as awkward and quiet as I am, I didn't know how to handle it. The first time we both ended up in the room together, we briefly introduced ourselves with our names and where we were from, and that was it. For the first couple of days, those were the only words we said to each other besides the, "Hey, I'm turning the lights off," at the end of the night. Our silence probably would have lasted even longer if it hadn't been for an unfortunate mishap that turned out to be a blessing in disguise. On our second or third morning there, I'd woken up before Gigi and gotten dressed before grabbing my makeup and personal hygiene stuff and heading across the hall to the community bathroom. I spent maybe half an hour in there getting ready as some of the other girls came and went. Once I was done, I went back to my room to put my stuff away and grab the stuff I would need for the rest of the day. Our workbook, my hymnal and lanyard, a water bottle, and a couple of other various things. But when I got back to the room, I discovered it was locked, and I couldn't get in because I'd left my lanyard with the key in the room. Thankfully, Tess was just leaving her room and let me leave her stuff in there while I went to breakfast. But I was still going to need all of my other things before I went to morning worship, and we were stuck on the other side of campus for the rest of the day. The logical solution was to just go up to Gigi and explain what had happened and ask if I could use her key. But at that point, we'd barely spoken more than 10 words to each other, and the thought of having to approach her with my dilemma really scared me. And when I think about it, it's not a scary thing, but it's outside of my comfort zone. Approaching new people under any circumstances is just something that makes me really nervous. But in this case, it wasn't something I could just avoid. I needed that stuff to be able to fully participate and get the most out of the day. I still put it off, though, and Tess and Lizzie spent the better half of breakfast telling me I needed to just go over there and talk to her. So when it looked like she was getting ready to leave, I finally went over to talk to her, and surprise, surprise, I had nothing to worry about. She was so sweet and understanding about the whole thing and went back to the room with me to unlock it. And then later that day, when we found ourselves back in the room together, we actually had a real, though admittedly brief, conversation. And as the week continued to progress, our conversations grew longer. It turns out she's a really sweet, smart, funny girl. And in group video chats we've had since leadership school, we've laughed together about the awkward start to our friendship. I'm really glad I was forced to break the ice, and I wish I would have had the courage to do it sooner. But it's something I've learned from, and even though I'm still awkward and shy, I find myself stepping outside of my comfort zone just a little bit more and trying to push myself to meet more of those Gigi's in life.
We will both be forever grateful for the risks that we took at Midwest Leadership School. Deciding to attend the camp was a risk in itself, but what we did during the week changed us forever. By risking vulnerability, failure, the unknown, and change, we grew as people. If we hadn't stepped out of our comfort zones, Midwest Leadership School wouldn't have been so impactful. Leadership School was one of the most surreal weeks of our lives, but it also made us feel more alive than ever before. Thank you.
As our meditation reminded us, to live is to risk dying. Risk is a part of our lives. We invite you to contribute now to a community poem. With your order of service, you should already have received an index card and a pencil. If you didn't already, have something to write with. If you need a card or pencil, raise your hand and keep it raised and we will bring them to you. Soon we will share a few minutes of silence. And during that silence, I invite you to write a response to the following prompt. A risk I'm glad I took was. Your answer can be a few words, a sentence, or even a short poem. You get to decide. Later in the service, your contribution will be read along with everyone else's. No need to put your name on the card. We want to be able to share every card, so we ask that you do your best to write clearly. Let us begin writing now. A risk I'm glad I took was...
risk I'm glad I took is taking the GT test at school.
A risk I'm glad I took is finding a way and leaving home to backpack Australia, then studying abroad in New Zealand.
A risk I'm glad I took was talking to the love of my life for the first time.
A risk I'm glad I took was to visit ABSM UU Church. We had been attending our previous church for 25 years and meeting friends there. It was comfortable. Our world is forever changed to have moved our faith community and journey to Des Moines UU. We are thankful to be here.
I risked not asking the person I loved to marry me. As a result, I lost a year of a beautiful life together. Given a second chance a year later, I risked asking again, and I have been rewarded ever since.
A risk I took was running a marathon, and a risk I took was taking 8th grade math.
A risk I'm glad I took the risk to say yes to a second chance at love.
A risk I'm glad I took was racing in the CIRE bike race yesterday.
A risk I'm glad I took was coming out to my family as trans.
A risk I'm glad I took was signing up to speak at the Capitol, standing with for my beliefs instead of off my usual complaining.
The risk I'm glad I took is deciding to go to a UU church for the first time. My life is better for this risk.
A risk I'm glad I took was getting married.
A risk I'm glad I took is not giving up on my dream, no matter how challenging it has been at times.
A risk I'm glad I took is letting myself be vulnerable.
A risk I'm glad I took was beginning to practice the ongoing, ever-recurring process of coming out as gay, a practice that will continue all my life.
A risk I'm glad I took was deciding to follow a Darzan rather than staying in my comfort zone. Although not always easy or what you expect, I always learned something of value.
A risk I'm glad I took was joining youth group.
A risk I'm glad I took was coming here for the first time.
A risk I'm glad I took was going to a new school and getting married for the second time.
A risk I'm glad I took is giving a memorial speech at a friend's funeral.
A risk I'm glad I took was jumping on an airplane to fly to a foreign area to meet someone who would become my lifelong best friend.
A risk I'm glad I took was moving across the country after getting maimed and in 1999, with no job and no place to live.
A risk I'm glad I took was introducing myself to my future husband.
A risk I'm glad I took was tracking down a beautiful young woman after losing touch. Marrying her has made my life.
A risk I'm glad I took was becoming completely present and living my life.
A risk I'm glad I took was leaving my East Coast home to move to Iowa.
A risk I'm glad I took was committing to my partner a very long time ago.
A risk I'm glad I took is attending a worship service in a tradition I did not grow up in. That's how I became a UU, and leaving my home.
A risk I'm glad I took was loving a difficult, complex person.
A risk I'm glad I took was talking to a girl on the first day of school. Now we're good friends.
A risk I'm glad I took was telling a boy I liked him. We've been married for 9 years now.
A risk I'm glad I took was working on my PhD and having a baby at the same time.
A risk I'm glad I took was accepting the love from Mitch, Annabelle, and Hayden and joining together as a family.
A risk I'm glad I took was leaving the comfort of my home and work, moved to a new country where I knew no one and could not speak the language.
A risk I'm glad I took was joining my college glee club.
A risk I'm glad I took was moving to a new city where I didn't know a single person.
A risk I'm glad I took was leaving Chicago and my job of 16 years and moving to Des Moines.
A risk I'm glad I took was volunteering as a something in Kenya for 5 years, serving 3 months each year.
A risk I'm glad I took was making new friends.
A risk I'm glad I took is joining a performance group.
A risk I'm glad I took was furthering my education and becoming a CPA.
A risk I'm glad I took was auditioning for the school play when I was the new kid and didn't know anyone.
A risk I'm glad I took was quitting my job and starting my own business.
A risk I'm glad I took was getting married.
A risk I'm glad I took was coming to services here and now continuing to be a part of this community.
A risk I'm glad I took was leadership school.
A risk I'm glad I took was moving over 1,000 miles away to take a job where I knew no one and had never even visited.
A risk I'm glad I took was changing jobs.
A risk I'm glad I took was unmentionable, and a risk I'm glad I took was joining the Unitarian Church of Des Moines.
A A risk I'm glad I took was choosing to have a child.
A risk I'm glad I took was moving and staying in Des Moines.
A risk I'm glad I took was marrying and helping create 2 new beings.
A risk I'm glad I took was to make new friends in my class.
A risk I'm glad I took was marrying my wife.
A risk I'm glad I took was auditioning for a theater company.
A risk I'm glad I took was to become a dad.
A risk I'm glad I took was traveling to Europe on my own.
A risk I'm glad I took was only coming to church 2 times a year.
A risk I'm glad I took is becoming an educator.
A risk I'm glad I took was asking her to try again.
A risk I'm glad I took was working on my truck.
A risk I'm glad I took was being a facilitator and a mentor.
A risk I'm glad I took was moving.
A risk I'm glad I took was opening my very closed heart to love.
My risk I'm glad I took was continuing to be vulnerable and to my partner vulnerable with and to my partner even though it can hurt. Running away seems easier, but easier isn't better.
A risk I'm glad I took was writing Rye twice. And a risk I'm glad I took was falling in love.
Taking a risk by standing in a group. If you don't risk it, you might miss it. Be open to discovery. Don't be afraid, you're not alone. Venture out of your comfort zone. Take a risk, unlock the mystery. If you don't risk it, you might miss it. Be open to discovery. Don't be afraid, you're not alone. Venture out of your comfort zone. Take a risk, unlock the mystery. So we have a bunch of kids up here. A lot of them don't sing. Some of them do. But they're taking a risk right now, right? They're taking a risk right now, right? A lot of you had some really profound things to say, but I want you to take another risk, okay? Take your bulletin, open it up, and there's the lyrics to this catchy song. And you're gonna sing it along with us, okay? With feeling. Here we go. If you don't risk it, you might miss it. Be open to discovery. That's it. Don't be afraid, you're not alone. Venture out of your comfort zone. Take a risk, unlock the mystery. Swaying is allowed, it's all good. Here we go. You don't miss it. You might miss it. Be open to discovery. Don't be afraid, you're not alone. Venture out of your comfort zone. Take a risk, unlock the mystery. One more time, here we go. You don't risk it. Yeah. You might miss it. Be open to discovery. Don't be afraid, you're not alone. Venture out of your comfort zone. Take a risk, unlock the mystery. Take a risk, unlock the mystery. Rockstar ending, here we go. Taking a risk, unlock the mystery.
So today's service was about risk. When I think of risk, I think of tightrope walkers and driving. But there's a deeper meaning when we think about the spiritual aspect of taking risks, how we are affected by the risks we did and didn't take. So here's why I'm glad I started taking risks. Risks that didn't affect my safety like tightrope walking, that is. Trying out for things is generally pretty scary. Going out for the soccer team, terrifying. Writing an essay for a scholarship, horrifying. Auditioning for a play, intimidating. Auditioning for a musical, blood-curdling. But I did it. Theater is one of my passions. I love contributing to my school's drama department, which, by the way, has a play coming up May 4th, 5th, and 6th. I can express myself through different characters on stage and use my passion to work hard backstage. While relatively confident in my acting abilities, I dislike my voice. For that reason, I hadn't tried out for a musical, despite the fact that I love singing. Taking the risk of exposing my ugly singing in front of people at auditions is bad enough, not to mention a whole crowd. But if singing and acting make me happy, that's exactly what I should be doing. Thankfully, my family is very supportive. Not only did I get to practice for the audition with a real vocal coach, my family puts up with me singing in the shower, and while I do the dishes, and while I do my homework, and in the car, and, well, you get it. Practicing with a vocal coach was nerve-wracking too. Here's this professional singer in my living room. I was out of my comfort zone the whole time, but nothing great happens in your comfort zone. Good things happen, cool things happen, but nothing great. So you have to step out of that zone. And guess what? I got a part that I wanted. Sorry. You may be thinking, see, Olivia, you can sing. But I learned more from this about taking risks and doing things that scare me, not about my talents. I kept taking this risk, auditioning for musical theater. My IHSSA musical theater event made it to All-State non-performing. I risked embarrassing myself a lot, but the risks paid off. My hard work certainly helped too, but without taking the risk in the first place, without stepping out of my comfort zone, I could never have gotten what I wanted. Now I'm more comfortable with risks like this. It's still out of my comfort zone, but that's where great things happen.